You don't need to learn 350. 80% of the instructors that are black belts have never had a fight in their life. Even if it's not karate, even if it's jiu-jitsu.
Did you ever bump into a guy called Fuk Young?
No.
Fuk Young was a small little Chinese guy who worked at Ruby Chow's in Seattle and knew Lee's family. And he was more one of these red boat Wing Chun guys. And so he knew Bruce and he taught him a lot of things secretly, which is strange because you never hear Fuk Young mentioned in anything related to Bruce Lee.
Didn't you say they were like handmates or something?
Strong told us a story where he flew at her and wrapped his leg and he was hitting him in the head.
Yes.
And he was a small little guy. And he apparently, it's interesting how stories, and I do believe, Sterling, for sure, that statement went a long way in the birth of Jeet Kune Do. But apparently one of the stories also is that Fuk Young taught Bruce Lee a form called Jeet Kune.
But that could be. And then later, the point is that within the conversation between Jet, he could have mentioned that, but it was Sterling that actually came up and put it in the script. So when Bruce was going in to teach, that there was a specific name. But Bruce never called his system. Because I remember talking to Sterling and Joe. I said, well, what do you guys do? He said, we're learning Kung Fu. Bruce Lee was teaching Kung Fu, Wing Chun Kung Fu, so he wasn't, and Bruce wasn't even calling it Wing Chun. He was just calling it Kung Fu. So when Sterling wrote the screenplay, I needed a name. So it's quite possible that Bruce had mentioned Jeet, whatever it was, but he never ever called the system that until Sterling came up with it. And after that, Bruce started calling what I teach is Jeet Kune Do.
So let's back up and let's lead into...
That's wild.
First
time I've heard that.
Your meeting with Bruce Lee. So you're at the internationals every year through the 60s?
Every year.
So you're seeing the Mike Stones, the Louis Delgado, the Ron Marcinis, the John Natividad, the Bob Whites, the Joe Lewises, the Bill Wallaces.
I wouldn't keep any Arquitas.
Benny the Jet, all those guys. Let's talk a little bit about some of those guys as you experience. Like, for example, Joe Louis.
What about?
Let's talk about that. You saw the evolution of, I've seen him come from a points fighter to a full contact fighter.
Incredible ego, because I'll tell you, talk about stories. Okay, 1960, it's got to be 66, maybe 67. I happened to be driving on Sunset Boulevard. Remember, there's only so many dojos here. I go by, and there happened to be a place called, I see a thing that looked like a karate dojo. Because it wasn't karate, it was called, Gordon DiMarsola was teaching, what was he teaching? But, this is ridiculous. With the names on me, I'm so old, But
Well, it's good to have the reference.
Yeah, that's why we need this stuff, man.
Because it's impossible to know every little thing in your brain every second you eat.
And that's why I said before in regards to episodes that I think would be good is when we have specific martial arts that we talk about on an episode, get it out, what it's about. Guy like this that's an encyclopedia of this kind of stuff can really help it along that way. So
Louis DeVoe was teaching, what was the system he was teaching? Here he is. Gordon DiMarsola. Teaching Okinawa tape.
Okinawa tape. We talked about it earlier, yeah.
So there you go.
Anyway, from now on, Emil, we keep this here side by your side.
Big sign Okinawa tape, right?
So basically Okinawa as te means foot, correct?
Yeah. So anyway, I pull in. Good class going. 10, 12 people. One guy stood out like a bead. Great looking guy. Beautiful hair. Muscular. Great moves. 10, 15 minutes, sat there, and I walked out. Didn't know like that. It's just another karate place, Turned out the guy there was Joe Louis. But I remember, I'll never forget, driving away, I was under the impression this guy was a movie star or some sort of actor because he was such a gorgeous looking guy. He was studying karate. Well, no idea. Years later, of course, I got involved with Lewis and I realized who he was and whatever. But one of the things that I realized is that the guy that I saw at that particular time was Joe Louis, but he was no name. He was never won a championship or anything. Of course, later on he became a big champion. And then when we got together, Rachel said that was a guy, and he admitted that he had studied with Gordon for about a year and a half. Bob Wall actually studied with Gordon too. But what made Joe Louis unique is the fact that, believe it or not, even though he had a great ego, subconsciously was very shy. He had opportunities. I'll give you an example. He had one of his students was Tom Tannenbaum. Tom Tannenbaum was the vice president of Universal Pictures. He made him an offer. He said, I'll put you under contract to Universal. Contracts had gone out of business, but he saw so much potential. He said, I'll put you under contract. So you know what Lou said? He says, good. Do I get to do a movie? He said, no. We'll start you off small. We'll put you in a role like a speaking role, and we'll work you up until make you a star. Lou said, I won't do it. He says, you got to give me a movie. Nobody understood why that happened. Now, I was close to Lewis for one reason, because John Copeland and Lewis were roommates at the time, so I was there all the time. I heard about it. I asked Joe, I said, why did you refuse? You're never going to believe what he told me. I said, why did you? I wasn't sure myself that if I start small, I wasn't going to bomb out. Says, I knew I could do one thing and hopefully it would all work out. He said, but if they started me off, I just didn't have the confidence to do it. I was like shocked. I said, that's the reason? He said, yeah, I don't think I could last 2 years doing little things. And every time I'd have to go in, I said, I think I would have fizzled out.
It's interesting you say that, because I kind of saw that in him. First time I met him, he was hitting a bag. And I said, hey, Mr. Lewis, how are you? And, he has gloves on him. So I went to bump hands, and he slapped my hand down, and he goes, so what are you? I'm not going to say what he said. So what are you? Are you or what? I looked at him. And I kind of went, eh. And I walked away from him. Came over a few minutes later, and half an hour later, he goes, hey, I can't remember what he said, but, it was something like, hey, how are you? I was hitting the bag or something. He says, I'm here in Los Angeles for a couple of weeks. We'll get together. So give me your number. We exchanged numbers, and I called him up. To be honest, probably most likely at the time, didn't think he'd picked up. He said, yeah, let's go to Gold's Gym and we'll work out. So him and I would go to Gold's Gym and work out, and we'd stretch, and he was very competitive, and he was a big guy, and he was in great shape. Even if it was an older Joe Louis, this is 2002.
What did he think you were when you came up?
Well, I don't want to go there.
He thought you were going for
It was use him, or it's just a weird situation.
Yeah.
So on his behalf, not on mine.
Right.
I was just saying hello, nice to meet you, and we were doing flat flies, and he said to me, can you do them like this, not like this? Because when you do them like this, you bring in the bicep. You have more strength. Now, I'm not a very big guy, but I'm a very strong guy. Genetically, I was always very strong. So I show. So he goes down. Now, keep in mind, Joe Louis was a good 6'1". At that time, probably 35 pounds.
What year was this year?
2004. Okay, this one. And he lays on the bench at Goals. And yeah, he does, I think, 35 pounds. Which, by the way, when you go all the way out, that's a good weight. I just looked at him and I picked up 45s, and I did it no problem. Picked up 45s, and he did it no problem. Now, we're doing them very isolated. Like, there's no arm on tight. They're straight and all the way up, so it's all that stretch. Yeah. I picked up 60s and did it no problem. He picked up 60s and went and dropped and says, you were a great kickboxer. but I got you. And he stood up, he goes, hey, yo. And I won't say what he said. But anyway, we were training together those days, and he would take me up on the lofted goals and stretch me and show me different things. And we'd go for something to eat at the firehouse, yeah. And you're correct. Joe was actually behind it all was a very insecure, shy man. But he was also a lovely man. He was a nice person. But then there was there was the times when he felt he needed to put his ego in front of his humbleness.
Or do you think that was more of a defense mechanism because he was kind of a shyer guy? Because a lot of the times in psychology, it's a slingshot effect. If you're a shy guy, you put up a front. So that way it doesn't appear that
I
you're
don't
shy.
think he did it as a shy guy. I think he did it because he's insecure and he need to be the biggest and the loudest in the room.
Right.
That's why I think.
And that's why he's a shy guy.
Yeah. Yeah. So the thing is with Joe, and I did a couple of seminars and classes with him, and I trained with him that time. But I got to know him on a level. It was just him and I, and he was a very nice guy. But he told me a story. He was supposed to play the Kickboxer he was supposed to play Van Damme's brother in Kickboxer.
Yeah, I remember you telling me the story.
Yeah, but you know who made him a star?
Oh, well, fill us in. Well, I know he did Jaguar Lives, and he did Force 5. Force 5.
Yeah, well, who?
Now, were you, because I know you managed Cynthia and a bunch of people. Did you manage them?
Do you know how the movie Force 5 came up?
I do not.
Okay. I came up with. I used to always go down to see samurai movies, and one of the big samurai movies was The Magnificent Seven. And up until that time, every martial arts movie was what? Hero, and they kicked ass.
Yeah.
But one day I had this crazy thought. I don't, by that time there was a lot of big name people, like Bill Wallace, Joe Louis, Norris, and all these guys. I put all these guys together. Now, Norris was already becoming a big star, but Lewis had not done any movies except Jaguar, and that sort of fizzled. Nobody. So I thought, I knew a lot of people in the industry because I was involved with it. And I know you just can't write a screenplay and just sell it like that. But Joe Louis was such a great looking guy. Says, I write a screenplay with Joe Louis as a star, I can sell it. So it was like that. We wrote the screenplay. Me and a friend of mine wrote the screenplay for Force 5. I gathered every martial arts magazine that was featured on. It was always like, looking that shredded thing and that great looking. I got lists of all the championships that he won. The whole thing. I had a friend of mine, one of my former clients, he was one of the big mucky mucks at William Morris. So I walked into William Morris. I said, Fred, look at this thing. So I got a screenplay, but forget the screenplay because I knew that I'm not the greatest screenplay writer, but it's a premise. Nobody's done this. But look at this guy.
Look at this vehicle we can take.
Look at this guy. You look at this. Look at this guy. He's a great looking guy. See an actor? I said, no, he's a martial arts guy. So I never heard of him. He says, you have to hear. Every martial arts guy in the world knows him. I had 25 pictures of Joe. I had all these. That's how I sold Force 5.
That's awesome.
That's how.
What year was that?
I think 81 or something.
Now, what I like about that, and I always like the concept of that, why people can look and go, it's a low budget movie and this and that. Well, it doesn't matter. It's a good little movie.
Yeah.
And it's very unique. It's a martial arts version of The Expendables.
That's except so
I looked at it as a martial arts version of the Magnificent
Seven.
That's how I came up with the idea.
No.
But in the original screenplay was Joe Louis. And I said that, right? He says, if you're going to do this thing, you got to do it with Joe Louis. And I also said, I remember that one of the other roles, the role that ended up going to the Australian guy,
Richard Norton.
Richard Norton, I had Bill Wallace in there, But of course, casting is a whole different ballgame. But they went with Joe Louis because I said, because my guy, that's what he said, you got to use Joe Louis. The rest of the cast was negligent.
Now, you had Joe Louis, Ben Urquidez, Sonny Burns, Richard Norton. Who else was in there off the top of my head? I'm trying to think. But were they all your picks?
My whole thing, I sold it with Joe Louis as the lead. The rest of the guys should be well-known martial artists. I did have Bong Suhan in there.
Bong Suhan.
Because Bong Suhan, I thought
He's very good.
yeah, he's very good. And I did have Bong. Those are the only two guys that I wrote in the original script.
And Bong Suhan, for such a nice man, get him across really malicious and devious and vindictive and evil on camera.
Absolutely.
You know, in that.
Which is why I wanted.
Yeah. Now, the one thing, though, I did notice at the time is that now nobody could doubt Joe Louis was a brilliant martial artist. And he was a brilliant fighter. And he had a side kick and a back fist that would test any man at any time period.
His jab was awesome. Yeah.
But when you look at him in Force 5 when he's fighting, now it could be got to do with time constraints. Maybe someone who's
The way Zach and you, the way they
he just wasn't that impressive on screen, though.
they didn't get.
I'm down. When you look at him in the air, the internationals, and you see him throw that side kick and that back fist, and that's just a camera sitting there. Had they just done that with some of those fight scenes, it would have been better than. I just saw him doing some of those fights, and he wasn't that impressive on screen.
Well, it wasn't
I think Pat Johnson did a terrible job.
Yeah. Now, was Pat Johnson your second unit on that?
No, I wasn't involved in it.
No.
I sold the whole thing.
Oh, you weren't involved in
I
that.
was not involved in it. I sold it and I got a good amount of money. So I got out of the game.
So let's back up now.
So Pat Johnson was the fight choreographer. It's a fight.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, so let's back up a little bit now. Let's not leave out talk to us of how you started in film. Because right up to from the very early days, like training Mel Bruno and so on and so forth, you trained Liam Neeson. Of course, a lot later.
The way I started was very simple. As I said, I met Dennis. Dennis took me down to,
Yeah, but talk to us about you. You worked like you did Spider-Man. Let's talk about that.
yeah, but all I'm saying is the way I got involved in the business was took me down, got involved with Mike Connors. Mike Connors was the Mannix, was a big show at that time. Started training Mike. And the guy's name was Freddie Wall, was the stunt coordinator that he introduced me to. Freddie was one of the big stunt coordinators at that time. And he took me around and, and said, do a demo. So I would kick and punch and those everybody, whoa. And so he ended up, I became basically a stunt, a stunt coordinator or fight coordinator, because he would use me as a stunt man, but the reason he had me there so I can show and do, what they were doing. It was way before anybody was doing martial arts kind of things. So I did all the television shows, Mission Impossible, Mod Squad, all that, the action shows that, as a matter of fact, Peggy Lipton on Mod Squad became one of my students for years. Anyway, so that's how I started. And then I started teaching Fred Williamson, and I started working with him, and then we started doing feature films. And Freddie Wall used me in almost every show that he did. Freddie Wall was the stunt coordinator for Spider-Man, so I ended up doing the Spider-Man TV show. That's how I got involved. But I'll tell you what basically happened in my career. At that time, between 66 and 70, before I opened the dojo, almost everything was filmed here. Because, this was everything was going here. Around 70, 71, 72, a lot of movies and features started going overseas because it was cheaper. A lot of it in Canada. And 72, I think it was 72 or at that time, they were making they were going to do a series on, what was Bruce Lee's,
Kung Fu.
not Kung Fu. Bruce Lee's son did a series, we played a crow or something. It was
The Crow.
it was called The Crow?
Are you going back to the 90s now? Are we in the 90s?
60s. 72. But it was called The Crow. I think, that's where he got killed or something.
Oh, you're talking about the 90s.
But
Okay.
no, they were going to do a series, but it never happened. But they were going to film it in. Let me tell you so. They were going to do this original series, The Crow, but they wanted to do the series in Vancouver, because that's when they started going to Canada because it was so much
So you're talking about 72 here.
72.
Got it.
But the film, they never got made, but that's what the idea. They offered me the job to go down there and do the fight choreography. The problem was that I had a dojo. So now here I am making a decision. If I leave I didn't have enough black belts. I was only open for 2 years. And I knew the business. I mean, by that time, I saw how everybody was like, all you do is, if you're in a stunt business, as you know, what's the number one thing you got to do? Chase and chase and chase and chase. I mean, it's like, not like, unless you were Hell Needham, nobody was picking up the phone to call you. So you had to go and beg the stunt coordinators, well, give me a job there, give me a job here, give me a job there. While I didn't have the dojo, it was fine. And Freddie Wall was using me all the time. But to leave, stay there for 6 months, and then come back, then I had to start all over again, chasing the thing. By that time, there's 20 other guys have come into the business, more and more martial artists were doing this thing now. So I wasn't the only one anymore. By that time, Bruce Lee was around. So I thought, am I going to do the smart thing? So you know what I said? Let's stay with the dojo, only work here in town, less and less, I don't care. But by that time, I started writing. And I got out of the game, and then I started selling screenplays and books or whatever. Time I just decided, I said, I'm better off running the dojo. And by that time, I had a lot of actors and actresses coming in to train. I said, fine, I can just do that. And every now and then I still ended up doing some movies or whatever, but not on the same scale. And it worked out perfectly well,
So let's back up when did you first hear about this guy Bruce Lee? Or how? Why I know. Take us through how you linked into.
Very simple. What happened is I met Joe Hyams at the internationals. Joe Hyams, I became right at the internationals. Joe and I became friendly. So he told me that he was taking private lessons in some called Kung Fu. It was Chinese martial arts. I didn't know anything about it. He said, "You're more than welcome to come up to the house and watch us." I said, "We're doing it on my, on my driveway." So one day I went up there. There's a little guy teaching him how to do all sorts of shit. I didn't know anything, After the lesson, Sterling left and Bruce, Joe introduced me to Bruce. And me, Bruce, and Joe went up to the Glen at some deli there. It's the first time I met Bruce Lee.
Well, what did you guys talk about?
Mostly talked about, he wanted to know what I was studying, and he was very, very complimentary on Japanese karate, because he felt that it had a lot of power. As a matter of fact, interestingly, he said something that I remember very distinctly. He said that he thought that Nishiyama was one of the best martial artists he's ever seen. And he went down to his dojo regularly to watch his classes. Of course, he was teaching in downtown, and Nishiyama had a dojo.
So a quick question, is that picture of Bruce Lee throwing the sidekick, where it's taken from behind, you're seeing his back, was that Nishiyama's dojo? Because it looks like it's somewhere here in Los Angeles.
Could have been.
But anyway, continue.
But anyway, so that's what he said. That's what we talked about mostly. And then I left, and then I would go back regularly to watch the classes.
And we're talking about what here, 1965, 66?
This is 65, 66.
So before Kato and everything.
That's correct. Before he was anybody, he was just another guy.
Now, what was your impressions when you saw him in Joe Hyams' driveway maneuvering? Did you, in hindsight, when you look back, did you see anything that was coming in the future, or was you just another normal-looking guy there?
No, the only thing that impressed me by the fact that he was very small but very quick, and you could say it was very dynamic. That's what impressed me. His motions were was very quick and very dynamic. He could move his hands very quickly, and that impressed me. But to me, it was just another martial artist. Remember, I'm coming from a Japanese system. I almost never saw Kung Fu before, I didn't see him at 65. He did not do a demo at the international.
No, he did it 64 and 67.
That's right. He did it later. But up until that point, so to me, he was just another guy,
So you're bumping into him, and then all of a sudden he walks into your dojo on Santa Monica and Doheny. Talk a little bit about
Who's that?
Did Bruce come into your dojo?
No, Bruce never came.
Or was that Jackie Chan came in?
Jackie Chan. But much later. No, the guy that walked in was Bong Soo-han.
Bong Soo-han.
That's who walked in. But no, so as far as me and Bruce go, is basically I would see him, and we would get together for lunches. I think once or twice we've had dinner. I think me, Joe, and him went to a private club called the Factory one day. But I do remember an interesting thing about him. He said that one day he asked me if I was quick. I said, well, I'm pretty quick. I mean, I got a black belt. I think I can hold my own. So he put a quarter in my hand. He said, you think you can, close your hand before I grab it? So I go, yeah. So he goes, said, you still have? I said, no, open it up. It was a dime.
You swapped.
I swapped them.
It's like in blood. So
Now, yes. Now,
Holy shit.
were you a magician at this time, or was that later? Now,
To me, it was just, I said, whoa, speed. It's very quick.
but he was not very intimidating to look at, was he? He looked very ordinary.
Small. We were both small, but he was smaller than I was.
No.
Very thin. But I could see that he had a lot of power.
Now,
Because when he was hitting the bags, you could see the impact.
of course, Bruce was fabulous. His concepts and principles, his abilities, where he came from, his ambitions, his drive, validation, everything was. You
But
can't
I
knock.
have a problem. I'm going to knock him for a little bit. And I'll tell you what that was. Bruce was a seeker, meaning he was always looking. This works better than that. He would come over and teach Joe, let's just presume, a parry. I remember this distinction. Guys, there was a punch, you parry, and then strike back. That kind. Well, 2 days later, comes back, he said, you know what? Instead of doing this, let's do it this way, come around. Okay, so they were doing that. 4 days later, he changed it. He was always seeking. So the problem with Bruce was, although he's very good as a teacher, he was always, one of the things I learned because I was a teacher also, I knew that you had to have a basics.
consistency.
You have to consistent, right? And even Joe complained about that, which is why Joe ultimately ended up training with other people, because Bruce wasn't consistent. As good as he wasn't consistent. He would teach you this for like 2 weeks and then all of a sudden switch gears on you and go in a different direction because he felt that direction was better.
Well, I just noticed that, again, what you're saying is great for Bruce. It's also great if you're with a bunch of very established martial artists who can change and vary things up. But if you're teaching somebody without a structure, it's difficult. A lot of the things I noticed in people today that have this whole JKD going on. Now, Pat Strong says they're just throwing out that name. It gives them credibility. It's a Bruce Lee name's pulling them in, but they're not teaching anything remotely what Bruce Lee was teaching at
It's
all.
all your concept.
I absolutely agree.
Well, I look at, and I'm a Kempo guy, so people would say, well, you're saying this biasly, but actually I'm not. I know women in Kempo that if you put these women, and I'm talking about most like black belts, that'd be black belts in so-called other martial arts and people that were trained by Bruce Lee and teaching his so-called JKD and so on, the Kempo women would tear them apart. It's all this flea flicker flimsy stuff. Therefore, the Kempo women are just pounders, as very boom, 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 and they're sharp. I just find that. So, where's the dilution along the way? Does it come back to where Bruce would keep changing things so nobody ever had a structure? Because to be good at something, and Bruce knew this, it's not 10,000 kicks. It's one kick you practice 10,000 times. But yet that statement kind of contradicts how he operated because he was consistently evolving. Does that come from that point in time where he never really had a structure, so he was always changing? And even Dan Inosanto told me once, everything was changing weekly, which is great, but is anybody really practicing anything enough to be really good at it?
That's one of the problems with Jeet Kune Do. It constantly evolves, and that was a problem. You cannot teach a system that evolves on a normal basis. You can take someone like Joe Louis and show him a few things that make him better because Joe already had a structure and something solid. So obviously some of the people the high ranks that Bruce or Mike Stone or somebody that worked with Bruce would say, well, if you do it this way and that way, it would make more sense because of this, that, whatever. But if you teach beginners, it doesn't make any sense. And everybody that teaches Jeet Kune Do, I've seen it, doesn't teach Kune Do, they're all different. But nobody has a beginning, a middle, and an end. They're all like this and that and this.
And then they all
Kali and
and they all justify it by saying put your own flavor on it. And that is correct, but I believe that's also a defense against not having a solid structure.
absolutely.
Well, I think you take even MMA today, right? You have your specific wrestling base, your specific, jiu-jitsu base, your specific Thai boxing base, boxing, whatever your stand-up is of choice. But you learn the basics of those specificities within either the ground or the stand-up. And then you maneuver along the way. So, and I think we've seen the evolution of that. Now, again, that's within a cage. There are rules. That's different, right? That's a sport.
Well, it's the same thing with with MMA. When the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu first came in, all they could do was go on the ground. I tell you funny stories about it. Nobody ever heard of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? We've been going back years and years. I don't remember the specific thing. I happened to be the fight coordinator on a TV show. One of the gimmicks of the show was
That's the night everything changed.
Yes.
that's true.
100.
But anyway, here's what happened.
That was Hoist Gracie, by the way.
Right. We were doing a show. This is late 70s. A TV show in which one of the principals was a judo expert. So we built a dojo at Columbia Studios, a judo dojo. And we sent out a request for people that knew how to fall, how to do judo. The only guy that was really doing it at that time was LaBelle. LaBelle was busy somewhere else. So we wanted to know stunt guys would come in, do judo. So one of the guys shows up as Horian Gracie. Never had. So he came in with a gi and whatever. So I said to Horian, I said, I'll never forget this funny story. I said to him, I says, what is it that you teach? Where'd you learn judo? He says, I don't do judo. I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Nobody ever heard of it. This is way before anybody heard about it. I said, well, what is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? He says, well, we do ground work and all sorts of things. I said, but can you show me some? I said, okay, so we square off. And the first thing he says, well, attack me. I said, why should I attack? Why don't you come at me? He said, no, you got to attack me, and then I'll show you. So we went back and forth like for a few minutes. I said, well, I had no idea what the guy was going to do. Going to kick me in the ball, but I don't know. But all of a sudden, the bell rings, and so we had to go. So nothing happened. The bottom line is that what made the Brazilians so good is that when they, the Horian and his group was very good, that we would go to dojos and do challenge matches.
Yes.
And here was the gimmick. You face a karate guy. What's the karate guy going to do? He's going to attack you. What's he going to do? He's going to go underneath you, grab your legs, and they were good at that. And they would choke the shit out of you. That's why they would win, because everybody was suckered into they would let them make the first move, and then they would sucker you. But if you didn't make the first move, they couldn't do shit.
Well, it's very difficult to just, shoot on somebody.
Pull guard.
Yeah, to pull guard on somebody, or to actually shoot to take somebody down. You got to fight your way inside.
No. It's only when you know what the guy's going to do. If I throw a side kick at you, and I have no idea you're going to go under me, and 99% of the time you don't think that because you think he's going to try and grab you, you're ready for that. But you're not ready for the ground. Remember, karate guys know nothing about ground fighting.
Now, the thing is about Horian, what I noticed when you watch those early fights, and by the what he did with Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and so on and so forth,
Legendary.
You got to give him kudos. I mean, he's a great promoter. He's also an excellent Jiu-Jitsu teacher and everything. And he ran he's older now, but he ran the academy for years, started at the garage in Torrance, so on and so forth, as we know. But it's like when you do certain arts, there's aspects, many different areas of a given martial art. With Jiu-Jitsu, it's kind of like boxing. What you're doing is what you're doing. How you fight is what you're doing all the time. A boxer sparring, but he's fighting. He's always hitting, avoiding getting hit, whatever. Where a lot of the karate guys were points fighters. So they're going, and I bamboozled them. I saw a few guys, square off at Horian, and they had I'm like, it's not a points fighting tournament. And they were ready to do points fighting. So automatically they're thinking, well, I'm just going to tap them. Who knows what was going on in their head, but what Horian is thinking is, I'm going to shoot, I'm going to take you down, it's like a points fighter fighting a boxer. The boxer's going to, if the boxer gets in close, you're going to knock him out. So I thought the dynamic of how they were doing is like, you might be a great street fighter or a great, brilliant in your art. You are now playing a points game against a guy who's just going to rush at you and grab you and take you down. So I just thought the dynamic was weird, not on Horian's behalf. And we don't know half of the other.
No, but here's what you have to understand. You're talking about at a time when judo was already very few people doing judo. Almost everybody was doing stand-up type of combat, whether it was Kempo or Shotokan or whatever. So the concept of somebody getting on the ground and taking you down was foreign.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. Take a look at what happened to UFC. How many times did Gracie win?
Twice.
Why didn't he win the third time?
Well, because they were aware of what he was doing.
And that's all I'm saying. My point is that once everybody got the idea that you don't let the guy come in, it became a whole much more difficult. Doesn't mean it's not effective. I'm just saying is that now you're no longer going to be an idiot and go in there and let the guy get underneath you because it was already well known. Now, had I done that when I first met him, I was ready to go in, and then I started thinking, I said, I don't know what this guy knows. I did not think he was going to go down on me and grab me, but I didn't know what he knew. Right. And I was also trained in Jiu-Jitsu, but I was trained in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, which is stand-up fight.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So coming from Japan, you have Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, which is on the ground, horizontal grappling, basically. Starts on the feet. Some people teach us starting back to back. Some people teach us starting on the knees, on the ground, or on your feet, whatever, but it goes down there. Just let's talk a little bit the difference between Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and Japanese Jiu-Jitsu.
Japanese Jiu-Jitsu is standing up. They do have groundwork, but 90% of it is standing up. It's basically, if you think of judo, Jiu-Jitsu is the forerunner. Judo is a stand-up. That doesn't mean there's no groundwork, but only 10% of it is groundwork. 90% of it is different throws and different techniques. The same thing with Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, except they are more involved in arm locks, wrist locks, similar to Aikido, in different throws. Very little groundwork. The Brazilians, for whatever reason, and I'm not an expert on it, they took it to the ground, and that's what they promoted. And for whatever reason, Horian was very good at selling that thing. Because his whole theory was, well, since you're a little guy, why stand up, get on the ground, and then we teach you tricks that's going to get you out of it, which in my opinion is silly, but whatever. But it worked for him.
So now, let's go back a little bit because there's a great crossover between Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, Japanese Karate, how it ended up in Hawaii, how it got to the mainland, and it all really integrates like a nice salad. You have a lot of different ingredients in there that makes up, you could make up one style out of it, but of course we know there's many different styles. So let's talk a little bit about Mitose, James Mitose.
Yeah. Well, Mitose was basically, was teaching Kenpo, some sort of Okinawan karate system. His system was more of an open hand system as opposed to, at that time in Hawaii, it was mostly grappling. Judo was very big in Hawaii.
Like Okazaki, for example.
Okazaki, yeah, all those guys, yeah. So basically that he was teaching, he was probably the first guy to teach it very openly as a karate style. I even call it karate. He called it, that's different names.
You're talking Mitose.
Mitose.
Kempo Jiu-Jitsu.
Kempo Jiu-Jitsu, exactly. But really it was karate in a, a modified version of what it is today. Mostly geared toward practical fighting, as opposed to as we, the Japanese with the katas and all the other things. Mitose didn't have that. Mitose basically geared it toward practical self-defense techniques And that's, and he was really the first one to make it big on the islands. And then from there, it evolved because a lot of people that got involved with Mitose ended up going to other places and sort of started, Cho and all these other guys, they started mixing it and doing all the stuff. So, Mitose was instrumental in spreading it and making karate something that people saw.
Now, he was definitely a very unique, interesting individual, both legally and illegally, as we know. But he had he had many famous students. One was, we have an early picture here of, you'll see at the bottom, number 7 is Thomas Young. That was one of us. And then you have Paul Pung, who was a Kempo guy in San Francisco. But of course, we got William Chow up here.
But Young was probably his number one student.
But it was William Chow that trained Ed Parker.
That's correct.
So,
but that's what I'm saying. See, my point is that that he was the one that opened up to all these guys, but they all started branching off and do different things. But he was the one that first opened up the karate type of thing, as opposed to the grappling system that was very common.
Right. Now, did Mitose, apparently he went back to Japan.
Yeah, he did.
And who did he study with in Japan?
Well, I mean, there's all sorts of different things. You have to, read up on it. But he, he had family back there, and so he studied with people. I mean, I don't know specifically, but obviously he got trained because when he came back, he was, he was adequate enough so all these people, started wanting to study with him. And remember, karate was very new. Kicking, punching, all those kind of things were very foreign. So when Mitose opened up that door, all of a sudden guys like Cho and all these other guys, flocked to him because it was so much easier than trying to throw somebody who's, remember, in Hawaii, most guys are big. They're like, the what do you call it? The Samoans are very big. So, when you go to the grappling system, if you're a little guy, you're not going to be able to beat a big guy. But all of a sudden, someone comes along that says, well, you have to be, all you got to do is kick him in the balls. Whoa, different revelation. And Mitose opened that door, how to chop, how to punch, how to do all those things.
Now, in Ed Parker's Kenpo, did Mr. Parker ever directly work with Okazaki? Or was that more, was that a Mitose connection?
Mitose.
And then it got watered down to Chow.
That's correct.
And then to Mr.
He
Parker.
never worked with Okazaki.
Right. Now, let's go back. Let's talk about another guy at the early stages of America, which even was before Mr. Parker, Robert Trias.
What about it? Well, Trias, Trias was really the first person to open up a commercial karate dojo in the United States.
Which was what year?
1946.
1946.
In Phoenix, Arizona.
On what art was he teaching?
He was teaching an Okinawan type of, he called it Shorin Ryu or Shorei Ryu, the way he called it. So it wasn't a well-known system, but he called his system Shorei Ryu. And then over the years, it evolved into all sorts of other names. But originally, he was teaching a system called Shorei Ryu karate. And he built the biggest martial arts organization of all time. He had the All-American, not the All-America, but the American Karate. I mean, no, the USA Karate, United States Karate Association, which at one time had hundreds of thousands of students. He was the first guy to realize that the way you got to spread karate is you bring people and then you give them, like, for example, you send one guy to Hawaii, to Florida, and you send another guy to North Dakota, and the third guy to Philadelphia. So you had all of these people that were teaching, even though they weren't teaching exactly what he was teaching, but they were part of the organization.
So it was kind of the same model as what Mel Bruno came up with.
Very simple.
Jim Parker wanted to do that.
Mr. Parker did do that with time. Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah. Now, you single-handedly saw Ed Parker's organization grow because you knew him from 65.
That's correct.
And in 65, he was still, even though he had, obviously, it was the second year of the internationals and he was very well established, but he was still growing. He's still in the process of growing into this massive organization.
What you remembered something. Everybody thinks, if you really look at the numbers, his organization is big, but it didn't even come close to some of the other ones.
Like who?
I mean, how many members do you think at any one time Parker ever had?
Internationally?
Yeah.
Thousands.
Yeah, thousands doesn't mean anything. Yeah, he has thousands. USK had 100,000.
Right.
Japanese Nishiyama had 150,000. So you talk about, yes, Parker had a big organization. Okazaki had 80,000. You know, I mean, we talk about
Yes.
in Philadelphia.
Yes.
Some talk about those organizations that were so much bigger. Parker was overblown for one reason, because of the fact that he had a lot of visibility. But as an organization, if you look at Kempo as a style, and look at the number of people that train in Kempo compared to Shotokan, Wado, Goju, it's minuscule. But because of Parker, it got to be a much bigger, much more well-known.
And was one of those reasons, do you think, the internationals?
Internationals, and the fact that he was involved in the movie business, and he was involved with Elvis Presley and all the play that he got. So a lot of people, so everybody looked at Parker's got this organization. But if you really think about it, I'm not putting that down. He's a terrific guy and all that. But numerically, he didn't have a big organization.
So at the time of the internationals, how many other tournaments were out there that could compete with the internationals? A handful?
Well, in 64, 65, 66, almost none. But by 67, 68, you had giant tournaments, by that time, the big tournament, by that time you had major tournaments in New York, and major tournaments in Washington, D.C. June Reese tournament was gigantic by that time. Henry Cho had a major tournament in New York by that time. So there was a lot more tournaments, and the USK, don't forget, the biggest tournament, even bigger than Parker's for years and years, with the United States Karate Association tournaments.
Which was?
So it's gigantic, which was Trias.
Trias, yeah.
Yeah, gigantic.
Now, I noticed Trias was also on some level amalgamated with Mr. Parker. He was at the internationals.
Oh, yeah,
He was
they got along very well.
in that special group.
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, they were all well known.
So did they cross over like where you had Kempo guys entering this tournament and other guys entering?
All the tournaments, all the America tournaments are open tournaments.
So anybody could
come in. The Japanese had closed tournaments. If you were Shotokan stylist or Japanese styles, you could compete. Remember, Nishiyama had Nishiyama. I'll give you okay. Parker had a tournament in Long Beach. Nishiyama had a tournament where he took over all of the sports center downtown. What do you call it? That big the
convention center.
Not the convention center.
The Coliseum.
The Coliseum. They had a gigantic tournament. It was all Japanese, so nobody paid attention to it.
So why do you think the Japanese only allowed Japanese and people with and now, when you say that, just for the audience, if you had a Nishiyama tournament and even though it was only Japanese, was it only Japanese within that organization?
No, Japanese style.
Japanese styles.
No, the organization was open to.
So you could be Shitoru, Shotokan.
It was only Japanese. Yeah, no. It wasn't his organization. His organization promoted it. But no, you could have,
So why was that at that time? When you had a guy like Parker and Trias that were open, was it still cultural?
There was a lot of prejudices because they felt that the Americans were, because number one, first and foremost, remember, if you go to an American tournament, what do you see? White belts, yellow belts, green belts, blue belts. This is a numbers game. It's all money. You go to a Japanese tournament, who was competing? Only black belts. So their theory was, how can you put a bunch of white belts in there to compete? It's ridiculous. They don't know what the hell they're doing, which just happens to be true. If you went to a Japanese tournament, everybody was a black belt, and everybody was good enough to be potentially in there. You went to an American tournament, it was a mishmash of all sorts of people. It doesn't mean there weren't any great people in there, but the majority of money came from where? All those white belts that paid you money. I used to go to the terms of it. They're ridiculous. These people don't even know how to do a front kick, and they're competing. Why? Because mommy and daddy gets a big kick out of seeing Joey go in there, and when Joey should never be in there. He doesn't know how to throw a punch.
Let's go back to one of the all-time greats.
Go ahead.
Bill Wallace.
What about it?
points fighter, full contact fighter.
Yeah.
How did it come about that he went from being a judo practitioner to just kicking with the left leg? Let's talk to the audience.
Well, he injured his right leg. It's real simple. So he couldn't do kicks with this, so became a left-hander only by necessity, because he had a problem with his right leg. And like almost everybody in the old days in martial arts started with judo because there was no karate. So Bill Wallace, only like everybody else, because Bill Wallace, where did Wallace start his martial arts training?
Wrestling.
No, where did he start? In college.
Oh, college. Yeah.
College, every college had a judo club. No karate. So I started in judo. Why did I start in judo? Because there's no karate. So the old timers almost exclusively learned some judo. Ask Chuck Norris what his first martial arts was.
I believe it was judo.
Yeah,
I think Dan Dos Santos was judo too in the military.
same reason.
Yes.
Because judo was big. Why was it big? Because military, almost every military base had a judo club. Why did they have a judo club? Because Mel Bruno promoted it to the whole military.
So Mel Bruno doesn't get enough credit.
No, absolutely not. Of course not. But he's one of those kind of guys, and nobody gives him credit because he's one of those.
Is it that no one gives him credit because for some political reason? Is nobody gives him credit because not enough of people are aware?
Totally because they're not aware of it. Nothing more. He wasn't like apolitical. He wasn't disliked. He wasn't because people don't know, but nobody ever wrote about him. Nobody ever talked about him. Because he sort of once he retired, he sort of, got out of the game. He wasn't in the judo game anymore. Wasn't in the martial arts game. He would come over. We'd spend 3 hours talking, and you know why he would spend 3 hours talking? He was lonely. He needed someone to talk to.
Did you recall them?
No, I didn't. But I remember. He was a nice guy. He was a wonderful guy. But like everybody else, look, I'll give you even a best example. I used to get calls, from who's the coaching guy in where it is?
Gobin Yamaguchi?
No. First guy that opened up in Manhattan.
Peter Urban?
Peter Urban. Peter used to call me up. Do you know why? Because he had nobody to talk to. Because all his students were gone. He was lonely. We'd have conversations on the phone.
Well, let's talk about him.
I was easy to talk to, so he talked to me. Yeah, but anything and everything. But that happened to a lot of martial arts guys.
Okay, so just brief us on Peter Urban, and then
What about him?
lovely guy. He was a unique individual. You have a couple of his books, and you kind of
Crazy.
On the other side, I've never heard it or told. Yeah, I'd love to hear about it.
He was probably the biggest name on the East Coast karate. He was one of the first guys to open up a dojo. He trained in Japan personally under Yamaguchi. Got into a big fight with Yamaguchi. Said, "Screw you! I'm going to call it USA Goju instead of American Goju. I'm going to make myself a 10th-degree black belt," which he did. He called himself, but he had the biggest dojo in Manhattan. But he was crazy,
hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students.
Oh, yeah.
What was the fight with Yamaguchi?
Well, Yamaguchi said, you can't just open up a dojo without my permission. So I don't need your permission. I said, I learned, I got my black belt. I can do whatever I want. He had an ego, and he did. He opened up a dojo and he called himself a 10th-degree black belt.